Let's move over to the next book, which is Jesus Unleashed. And I've got these open to Amazon. So anyone who looks at this, you can get them for a pretty good price at Amazon. And Jesus Unleashed comes from the Lucan account of the story of Jesus. So walk us through that one, Ron.
Yeah, yeah. And I got to plug in there. You can also get them cheaply at Whip Stock. They're the
Okay,
publishers,
Whip
Cascade
Stock
Publishing.
Publishers. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, with Luke, back in rural Missouri, I went through the Gospel of Luke in 3 years. When I was at Metro Church of Christ here in Gresham preaching, went through Luke 3 years. But as I was doing the God of Second Chances, I had all these notes to write a book about Luke one day, and I began to look and think that Luke is actually, I believe, using this restoration backdrop. So it's not just the restoration from Babylonian captivity. In Luke, there's a restoration from some captivity, like Simeon, who holds baby Jesus. He's looking for the restoration or the hope of Israel. Anna, the prophetess, goes out, and she also looks for the redemption of Israel. These terms are common in Luke. The research on Luke is indicating that Luke is this really, really gifted Greek writer. His Greek is excellent. He says in chapter 1 it's narrative, which shows an advanced training in writing. But one of the things we know about the ancient schools is that they copied the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid and that many times they were encouraged to write history like these classics. And we think that Luke is kind of telling the story of the empire of Jesus, like these other, and so it's a grand epic. It's both books, Luke and Acts. It's not just about Jesus and just about the Holy Spirit. It's about the beginnings and the spread of this new empire.
Mm-hmm.
And I suggest, and of course, those who endorse it, Hamilton and Michael Frost now and Brueggemann have, they appreciate the backdrop of the restoration, that Luke is writing the creation of this new empire as a restored Israel. And so you have Jesus in the synagogue coming to set the captives free. That's all out of this Babylonian context. And who are the captives, though? They're different. The captives are the sinners and tax collectors. You begin to see that. That's the point. We're here to free those on the margins. And so throughout Luke, he mentions repentance, sinners. Pharisees came up with the sinner term. They invented that to marginalize people. And so Jesus is breaking these walls down. You see a lot of emphasis on Jesus on the margins trying to restore this kingdom. And then, of course, Acts 1:6-8. Are you at this time going to restore, the empire of Israel? And Jesus says it's not for you to know. The Spirit will come upon you, you'll have power, and you'll be witnesses. And so Acts is actually, when you begin to see that kingdom restored, is in the spreading of the gospel.
In one sense,
those two together.
You're kind of taking the analogy that here, kind of by that classic storytelling, here's this young boy at the fringes, at the margins of empire, who begins to break in, and as his influence grows, there's a new empire that comes into play that stands in maybe not opposition, but certainly in contrast to the known and existing empire.
Yeah, I mean, and we have these two empires here. I mean, this is occupied Palestine. So we have the Roman Empire that's bringing a sense of peace, but we also have these very corrupt Jewish leaders. Not every Pharisee is bad, but you have these very corrupt Jewish leaders who are oppressing people, to keep peace, And this empire is the most unlikely people. I mean, you got the rich young ruler who, he follows Torah, and Jesus says, in Luke, Jesus says, one thing you lack, and that's afraid. Matthew says, if you want to be complete or mature, Luke says, here's what you lack. Sell everything, give to the poor. And then he goes along, and then you come along quite a few verses later with Zacchaeus, who is not following Torah, but he's willing to give to the poor, and Jesus pronounces him saved right there. And so you have this, we call it divine reversal. You have, woe to the rich. Luke doesn't say, blessed are the poor in spirit. He says, blessed are the poor, period. And so you have this divine reversal. Suddenly, those people who've been marginalized, driven out, ancient world saw poor people as being inferior, people, which was majority of the population. Suddenly, these are the people who are going to inherit the kingdom and lead the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And you get into Acts. What do they say about Peter and John? They're common, uneducated men. And they see the boldness of these men. And that's where the Spirit brings boldness to the people of God. And so you begin to see that pattern, that this divine reversal happens through the power of God and the Spirit.
So how do you see this playing out at Agape, where you have people who are marginalized, who are oppressed, who certainly wouldn't be called Torah practitioners?
Yeah.
So what's the message that Jesus Unleashed kind of brings into Agape?
Well, so far, it's kind of been a two-edged sword, because we've actually had people, and I think this is just part of the American dream. When we live in a system that says, if you work hard, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you'll become a millionaire one day. And the research is all saying that isn't true. There are a few people that do that, but whatever place you're born at, that's typically where you stay. And so we have people that come in and they truly believe in this American dream, and they don't buy. They're kind of like the rich man and Lazarus, who, you have this guy who's laid at his gate. And in the ancient world, all you have to do if you're laid at the gate is turn your head around. You can look in the room and you can see the dining room straight across. So this poor man, he would love to eat off the crumbs that fall from the table. So you get the idea that he's laying at the gate, he's looking in, he can see this rich man eat. And then you ask the question, how many times did that rich man walk by this poor man who was laid at the gate by his friends? Because his friends thought, surely this man will give him money. How many times did he have to walk? And then they die, and there's a boundary between the rich man and Lazarus. And he can't cross it. The poor man, Lazarus can't cross this boundary, even if he wanted to. Whereas when they were living, the rich man wouldn't cross the boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And the rich man says, man, I got to go back and warn my family. And Abraham says, they've got Moses and the prophets. And so there's this message here that the Bible has always said you got to care for the poor. And if you don't care for the poor, you're ignoring Torah, you're ignoring the Bible. And I think one of the things that we've had people come here and we've stressed, that the Bible teaches that we are to be people of compassion to those on the margins. And it's been really hard for them to accept, and they've walked, they've left. But we've also had people come in and see that the Bible offers hope for me, who's a person on the margins, but the Bible also calls me to be a person of compassion to those on the margins. And Agape has helped us to create an environment where we see that salvation is dependent upon our willingness to practice compassion and mercy on those who are the margins of society. It's taught us, as a minister, I've always asked the question, how would we feel if someone said, your minister is a friend of sinners and tax collectors? There are some that would say, I'm embarrassed about that. At Agape, we want to be proud of the fact that all of our ministers are expected to be out in the community, interns, people, leaders, home community leaders. You need to be in the community around people because you need to be a friend of sinners and tax collectors. That's the highest compliment we can receive because it means we're becoming like Jesus. That's what Luke has kind of done for us in a way.
Great. So before we hit the Spirit Unleashed and you give us a look at what's coming, what are a couple stories at Agape of Agape people that for you, they just kind of represent the heart and soul of what God is doing at Agape and this deep kingdom work that is expressed in your books?
I look at, I can start with, we have some Christian college graduates who, we have some who've come in and have not made it and they've left. We have some who've stayed And actually, Pepperdine has been one that's given us some people that they are, they are financial contributors, and these are young people. They're driving our finance team. They're leading our worship. They're learning to lead worship. They really have come in and said that this is what we're about. And they've shared stories with being frustrated as young people, maybe not going to church because they didn't feel connected. But they found a way to come in and say, this is what the gospel's about, and they've plugged in. And we've been really excited by some of our Christian college people who've come in here and have just said, we're going to do this, and this is what God has called us to do. And they're willing to practice compassion. And I'm just, Lori and I are both blown away by how they make room and accept people. And they would say that wasn't them 5 years ago. And on the other hand, we have people who've recovering addicts or who have been homeless, who've gotten on their feet. We work with the system, so we get them in the system. And one's a worship leader. We have some who lead home communities. We have some who lead in our benevolence ministry. And so we've seen people who've been given a second chance at life, and they've come in and they've really, really worked to be part of the system. And they've shown a sense of love, but they've also been willing to receive love. But here again, they struggle with a lot of guilt and shame. And so much of what we do is to just love them and let them know that there's hope.
That's great. I just know, having been to Agape, that it is a very varied audience, and there's no front and back, so to speak. There's no high seats, low seats in it. It's a church that seems to fully comprehend people's journeys and is accepting while also putting boundaries. I mean, there are healthy boundaries in place that give people guidance for their lives, and I really appreciate that. Agape is just always a great place for me to be whenever I get a chance to go and be with you guys. So
they enjoy hearing Stan preach. They really do. They appreciate that. The good doctor, sometimes they call
the
him.
good doctor. That's great. Thank you.